Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Jordan, also known as J-Monster, and I want to thank you for joining me for another 30s Reforged army creation video. Today we're going to be looking at the Kingdom of Cardolan, the sister kingdom of Arthedain and Rhudaur. Cardolan was created in, I believe, early 800s, or late 800s of the Third Age, and it was the second to the last kingdom to fall during the fall of Arnor, the events surrounding the rise of Angmar and the destruction of the Northern Kingdom. In Third Age Reforged, Cardolan is an interesting faction. Unlike their sister factions of, say, Arnor, or rather Arthedain now, and Rhudaur, they do not have very high morale bonuses. And you can interpret this in many different ways. The people of Cardolan were eventually driven out of their country by the Barrow Whites, so they were, I think, one of the only Dunedain factions to run away instead of defend their homeland. So maybe you can look at it that way, but from our perspective, it's just a useful mechanic to differentiate them a little bit. One of the things that they do have going for them is their high shield and high armor values. And that's really where Cardolan is at their best. They're a little bit lower on melee defense on a few units, but they do make up for that with solid armor and solid shields. In addition to, they have a lot of strong Dunedain units that have Inspire capabilities, and some of them are quite significant. So let's take a look at some Cardolan army comps, since I know that's what you guys are all here for. Ah, yes, and of course, because I forgot, up there in the top right, that's where you're going to be able to find Cardolan's faction bonuses. And the way that we do stats in Reforged is, well, I don't want to say too much because, I don't want to give away all the fun. But we calculate stats, and some of that is based on unit size and other traits in the EDU file. And then we apply these faction bonuses last to help and specialize units. So it's a useful little tool, and now you guys know a little bit more about how Cardolan works behind the scenes. But in any case, let's take a look at some Cardolan army comps. Cardolan is very interesting. They're actually going to be getting some new changes, so I think the best place to start would be with some of the changes that Cardolan is going to be getting coming down the pipe. So, Greenwatch units, Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen, Greenwatch Garrison Archers will be going away, and I'm sure many people they have mixed feelings about that. But hopefully you won't once I tell you what they're being replaced with, rather. The Cardolan units are going to be replaced with something that shares a model with the Tharbad units, so the Tharbad Riders, Tharbad Warhammers, and things like that. They will be getting a model that is reminiscent of these two elite units, but they will be distinctively lower tier. I believe they're like Tharbad Militia Garrison Archers, or Tharbad's Militia Spearmen, or something like that. We actually have somebody who's working on the names right now, so it might be something completely different, so don't quote me on that down the line, because it might not be accurate once 0.97 comes out. But yes, these units will be more heavily armored, and they will be just generally overall better, and a nice boost to Cardolan in general. So, now that that's being said, you may be wondering what's happening with the Minas Garithlan Spearmen, and the Minas Garithlan units generally. We are not sure right now. Currently, in this version of the build, if you take a look here, the Garithlan Spearmen are actually effective against armor. And whether or not that is something that stays, it remains to be seen. But we are going to find some ways to make the Garithlan units still useful and relevant in the Cardolan roster. On that note, the Minas Garithlan Swordsmen were one of the men-at-arms units to get an extra point of melee defense and an extra point of damage. So as I mentioned in the last video, I did a little bit of an overhaul to a lot of sword and board units generally, the kind of entry-level sword and board units, and the Minas Garithlan Swordsmen were one of the units affected. So they are a little bit better there. They should have about 4 skill, and of course you can see that they have 6 damage, and you can upgrade that pretty easily to 7 damage. That makes them 7 damage, 9 armor, 4 skill, 8 shield, which is, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty decent stat baseline, and their speed I think has gone up to 1.0 as well, since speed has pretty well gone up across the board. So that's a useful thing to know. What other big changes does Cardolan have? Ah, yes. Dunedain commanders. You may notice now that they have a bonus fighting cavalry. That's because they are now spear cavalry. Otherwise, their stats are unchanged. They still deal the same amount of damage, but they are a little bit better against cavalry. So that's a nice little boost to Cardolan's capabilities there. Merchants. Ooh, a little bit of lag, which is strange because we're only at a menu. In any case, the mercenary cavalry have shrunk a little bit. They do have 10 morale now, and I think they went up in skill by like 1 or something. So overall, they're a little bit easier to keep in the fight with that 10 morale, but they are a little bit smaller to kind of balance that out a bit. And as I mentioned in the last video, we are taking a move towards usually making the standard size for cavalry about 60, just to make those units a little bit more elite, and other things like that. So the Tharbad Riders might not be staying at 73, it's just not something we've really gotten around to on the test build yet. Let's see, other interesting changes. Thieves of Tharbad, I believe, will be getting a custom projectile, which is either going to take the form of smoke bombs, which is cool. It is actually possible to have a smoke projectile in Medieval 2. Age Reforged has a unit, I believe they're called the Apthys throwers or something like that, and they create giant smoke clouds, and it's actually really useful because it can stun units inside of it. It doesn't do damage. It's like a small projectile on the ground that does damage to units in an area, or like attacks them in an area, but it technically does 0 damage, so it can't kill anything, but it will stagger them. So we're thinking about something like that for the Thieves of Tharbad, and for maybe a couple other thief units as well, like the Hashari, who currently lack a projectile as well. Or they'll just get the standard throwing knives of all the other assassin type units. So it remains to be seen. Bandits. Bandits, as a result of the terrain bonus overhaul, which is normally not very significant. Usually it adds about 1 damage or so to units that are fighting on favorable terrain. But bandits are one of the few units, along with assassins and a couple of others, who get significant bonuses. So you can see there they get a combat bonus hiding in the woods, and I believe they get 3 or 4 extra damage, so that actually brings them up quite a lot, and it makes them infinitely more useful in certain kinds of situations. Now the bandits have a bit of a niche, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. Ironborn Axemen, I believe, have gone from 6 morale to 8, so they are easier to keep in the fight, and that is just a great thing for that unit overall. They can also hide anywhere, which makes them useful for ambushes, so Cardolan is starting to get a little bit more of an ambush flavor, so they've got a fair amount of units that can hide and spring out at the last moment, but they've also got some fairly armored units as well, which is one of the things I think that makes Cardolan a bit more unique than, say, Arthedain. Arthedain does have some Dunedain units that can hide, but not to the extent of Cardolan, and to actually share some of those Dunedain units with Cardolan. So there's a significant amount of Cardolan's roster which can hide. Gwathla Trackers, for example, all these 3 units here, and the Dunedain Rangers in addition to. So it adds a lot of flavor to the Cardolan units, which is really cool. And I think Greenwatch Garrison, yes, the Greenwatch Garrison footmen, if you don't have them in Phalanx, and I think maybe if you have them, you need to have them in loose formation as well, but you can actually hide them in addition to, which is really cool. But I think that's most of the big changes. No, actually, that's not true. Wardens of Tirn Gorthad, for the time being, give +5 morale to all units nearby, which makes them a serious anchor for the Arthedain army. Extremely useful at keeping your lower tier units in the fight. This is where the party is going to happen. The chaos is going to rage around the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad and other units as well, like the Dunedain Captains, who give +10 in a smaller radius. And that's going to be the crux of your army. So you definitely want to keep those units intact and prevent them from fleeing, because neither of them are locked morale. That's an important thing to note. Neither of these units have locked morale. They can be routed. It's not easy, but if it happens, it can be disastrous. Let's see here. More lag. I don't know why that's happening. Mercenary War Chiefs, they got an extra point of morale, so they're up to 9. So they're a little bit harder to rout. And I think that's really the only big change that came to them, except they got maybe like 5 extra men to kind of round off their numbers, because uneven, weird numbers of units kind of bugs me. Although, of course, I say that, and you're looking at a unit here of 95 Thieves of Tharbad and 70 Tharbad Riders, but trust me, I'm getting to it. I think that is the length and breadth of the changes for Cardolan, other than some minor things like +5 men for the Measkirth and Sharpshooters, just to bring them to 160. Yeah, things like that. So let's take a look at some Cardolan armies. A lot of players that have success with Cardolan tend to use pretty similar builds. You'll see things like maybe 4 Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen and 4 Greenwatch Garrison Footmen, or 3 of each. And then you can mix that in with some other things. On the test build right now, it's definitely worth it to maybe eschew that unit entirely and bring 3 units of Gorithlin Spearmen, who, as I said, are now AP, so you're going to want to give them a little bit of extra damage as well. And this makes a really solid front line That is intimidating to take on. You got the range of the Greenwatch Garrison Footmen, and the AP of the Minas Tirith Spearmen makes it very nasty. And you can supplement that AP with some really strong choices. So Minotaur Roman Guardians, a couple units of Garithlan Sharpshooters, for example. I don't necessarily need to have the Minotaur Roman Guardians. They are a bit optional. So you could take this just to save a bit of money. And then you could focus a bit more on your cavalry. So the Royal Court of House Thorondor make a great General's Bodyguard. Dunedain Commanders give you a little bit of oomph on your cavalry line. We'll kind of replace my general with them. A couple units of Merc Cav, which, as I said, are better. They're not as good, I think. I don't think they'll end up being as good as they used to be, but that's okay. They are a lower tier unit, and they are quite cheap. And they did get some nice buffs to compensate, so it's not so bad. And there you go. Solid cavalry force there. Solid infantry line. A little bit of work done there on your skirmishing force. Maybe if you're going to go with 3 pikes, you could take some Wardens of Tirn Gorthod instead, and make that line a lot more solid. It will cost you a bit. Mercenary War Chiefs, definitely worth the time now, I think, and it certainly makes up for Cardolan's lack of a non-super elite Swordmaster unit. So you can definitely rely on them to get a little bit of work done, especially if they're supporting this line. Let's see here. Dunedain Rangers are always nice to have. Maybe a couple units of those Greenwatch Garrison Archers, and then you got about 675 left to spend on pretty well whatever you want. So maybe what we'll do here instead, take a couple of Gwathlo Trackers, Greenwatch Garrison Archers, solid phalanx, some decent cavalry. Some of them are actually quite capable lancers as well. 2 615 lancers, some reserves, rangers, very good for thinning out the herd. If you don't want to bring rangers, you could bring something else. Let's see here. Minotaur Roman Guardians are 1,000. So if you want to drop some upgrades here, let's do it from one of the Merc Cav. Ooh, can pop that down, and you've got a really strong skirmish line. But maybe that's not enough reserves for you. Maybe you want to do something a little bit different. So let's get rid of these Gwathlo, not the Gwathlo Trackers, the 1 unit of Greenwatch Garrison Archers and those couple units of Merc Swordsmen. And let's do something a bit different. Let's see. What would make some decent reserves? Like I said, the Men at Arms units got buffed. So you can take a few of them, and you still have enough money left over to maybe even bring another unit here. So unit of Rangers, solid core. You've got some reserves that are actually quite decent, and you got crossbows and things like that instead. Although I definitely recommend that you bring the Minotaur Roman Guardians when you can. Certainly a very worthy unit. Let's try something a little bit differently. Let's say you want to make an effective army with Cardolan, but you don't want to use any cavalry. It is possible, and I've seen it work. So let's take some... Oh, no, we don't want to take an extra one. So we'll take... That's a pretty decent spread right there. A couple units of Minas Tirith Spearmen. Maybe we'll take a 3rd one to use as a reserve. Ooh, that lag is really nasty. I don't know why it's doing that. It's probably my hard drive acting up. We'll take lots of these crossbows, extremely useful. And Greenwatch Garrison Archers to support. And what else? We've got a lot of money left over because we're not spending it on cavalry, so we really have our pick of the litter. Dunedain Captains, we'll even upgrade them to something really strong. I think that gives them about 9 armor and 25 attacks, so a little bit more lightly armored, but they certainly don't lack in skill, and they certainly have a lot of damage.
That's all.
If we're not bringing cavalry, we could go for a more numbers-focused build. There you go. A couple units of the Mercenary War Chiefs there. And... Not enough to bring another 2 of those low-tier units. But we could bring some Dunedain Rangers, which is always nice to have. And let's see, we'll put our general in that unit of Dunedain Captains, which is quite fitting. So we've got a really solid Cardolan infantry force here. One that is not going to be broken down very easily unless the enemy has a ton of pushing units, which would certainly be a weakness of this army. But in the event that that does happen, you have your Mercenary War Chiefs that you can fall back on. And you've got your crossbows as well, which you can use to fire at will into those blobs that are pushing their way through your phalanx. So there's a possibility for a Cardolan army right there. Let's get the extra point of attack to everyone. Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad, perhaps. Let's do something a little bit more skirmish heavy. Cardolan does have some good skirmishers, so let's do that. So we're going to go skirmish and cav heavy, so that's really popular in the meta right now, well, at least with a certain crowd. Armor for everybody, hooray. I don't know if the Cardolan units get it. I do not believe they do. Or the Cardolan, the Tharbad riders, I mean. Well, let's see here. Lots of skirmishers. Why don't we have a build that incorporates the Minas Girthan archers? They are quite obnoxious to get rid of, shall we say, with that 9 armor and that 4 shield, so it can certainly be a big problem. And you can for your enemies to knock down, you can mix them in with the Gwathlo trackers. That's a solid skirmishing army right there, backed up with some Minas Girthan sharpshooters. Any cavalry that tries to run these guys down is not going to have an easy run of it. Bring a little bit of spears just to defend your archers. Actually, you could even forego the Minas Girthan spearmen and instead go for pikes that can hide themselves. So Greenwatch Garrison footmen would be useful for that kind of thing. Although they do have to take a moment to get themselves back into spear wall formation to be particularly effective against cavalry. So I might go, just for the sake of responsiveness, I might go with 3 units there of the Minas Girthan spearmen, which is always a nice thing to have, especially on the test patch. Let's see. A little bit more along on the skirmish line. A couple units of Merc Cav, just in case you need them, because you never know, do you? And maybe we'll even put our general in there so that we can use the Royal Court of House Thorondor a bit more freely. Let's give damage upgrades to the Minas Girthan sharpshooters, because they're quite strong in melee after the fact. Oh, decent anyway. 50. Who do you want to give that to? I suppose we probably want to give it to the most heavily armored units we have available to us. And there you go. Nice little skirmish-heavy Cardolan army, which if you have the micro, you can actually make great use of. Let's see. Cardolan in a siege. We did have a siege with Cardolan, and it went pretty well, actually. Of course, the attackers were far, far in excess, more numerous than the defenders. However, it doesn't always work out well when you play with Cardolan. Sieges can put you in a lot of situations, and you need units with high morale and good defensive and offensive stats in order to pull through. And frankly, Cardolan is more defensive than I think the other Dunedain factions. So Gondor can play defensive, but they also have the tools to be offensive if they need to. And Arthedain, of course, has their cavalry, which they can use to great effect, very aggressively. But Cardolan doesn't have that quite so much. Their cav is not as much of a powerhouse. It's certainly better than Gondor's in a lot of ways, but it's also not the best around. They tend to be a little bit more lightly armored than the Gondorians. So, as you can see here, the Dunedain Royal Court of House Thorondor, I think they're all at 7, and you can upgrade them to 9, but still that's less than like the base armor stats of Gondorian calves. So missiles can be a problem for Cardolan cavalry and things like that, and Cardolan units in general, which tends to lend them to being a bit more defensive. That being said, their heavy units are pretty heavy. Minas Girthan's spearmen and things like that, they have a base armor of 9, which is like the equivalent to the first armor upgrade for Gondor. So Gondor has to pay for that. They have to pay extra, whereas Cardolan doesn't really. And they've got high shield values as well, certainly higher values in excess of those of Arnor's basic units, who have, I believe, about 6 shield to the Cardolan 8. So they can stand up to arrows reasonably well with some of their units, but they are, in my opinion, at their best when they're playing defensively. They have lots of skirmishers. Minas Girthan sharpshooters are excellent when your enemy is coming to you and walking into the range of these units. So, yeah, I wouldn't really play with Cardolan too much in a siege. So, I wouldn't even bother to make an army with them, since it's not something that I think I would ever do, and it's not something that I recommend that you guys ever do. That's just kind of how it is. Maybe you could pull it off, and if you do, send me the replay. I want to see it, because that's like It's like unicorn rare right there. I have not seen Cardolan in an offensive siege where they've won yet. Not to say the Cardolan is weak, of course, but they have strengths and it does lie elsewhere. And a siege, I think, plays more to their weaknesses than it does to the strengths that Cardolan brings to the table. So I hope you guys found this informative. I hope it was useful for you. And yeah, let me know what you think of some of the changes that we have coming down the pipe for Cardolan. The new Tharbad units I am particularly excited about, and I'm interested to see how we are going to end up implementing them and what they're going to look like ultimately and things like that. I'm pretty sure they're going to be about as well armored as the Tharbad units, but you know, I could be wrong. They could be more or less. It really depends. They are intended to be a militia tier unit. But in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as J Monster. I hope you found this fairly... It felt a bit disjointed and a little bit more stream of consciousness than normal army creation video useful. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.